You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that this happened? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Welcome to the third and final part of Hydroplate Hype. When last we left off, we were told that the Earth would essentially just be one giant dust bowl with constant dust storms, making it seem more like the desert planet of doom than any kind of perfect paradise.
A desolate, dry planet with vast deserts.
Oh, right, and it was also a ticking time bomb that was going to literally explode any day now. Which, I feel like that kind of contradicts the whole "and it was very good" thing from Genesis, but hey, what do I know? I'm not a theologian. Anyway, hey Brian Nichols, you're up again.
This estimate of the volume of water under the crust is based on the concentration of salt in the oceans today compared to what was found in the Bavarian KTP dig hole.
Thereby assuming that ocean water and the deep crust water have the same source. But do we actually have any reasons to believe this? No, of course not.
In addition, water found in comets contains around twice the deuterium concentration that is in the oceans.
Demonstrating pretty conclusively that the oceans and the comets have different sources for their water, this is a problem for hydroplate, not a feature.
The estimate also assumes that pre-flood seas were fresh water, which after the flood mixed about equal parts with this super salty deuterium-rich subterranean water, diluting it to the levels measured in the oceans today.
Remind me, what prevented the salts from accumulating pre-flood? Is it miracles? Because you said you weren't using those, and some salts in today's oceans would take far less than the supposed time between the fall and the flood to accumulate. Sure, the oceans at the time of the flood might not have been as salty as they are today, but they would have been at least brackish and certainly not good for drinking before then.
I will describe more about the most likely origin of comets later, so hold on to this info, as I'm sure at this point it seems strange that water and comets would have anything to do with the flood or with the Earth.
Oh, we know already. It's that you think that all the comets were formed from Earth water, and that this stuff also caused essentially all the craters in the solar system. Which is why this theory is often amusingly and pejoratively called the lunar bukkake theory. Kids, if you don't know what that is, wait till you're like 18. By then you'll have probably figured it out.
Hydroplate does not place an upper bound on the original volume of water in the chamber because there are some unknowns that have a large effect on the final answer. Today we know there are large amounts of water trapped deep in the porous Mohorovičić boundary layers, but we don't know by volume how much is down there.
Nor do your citations even claim that we found this water. Just that such water existing in and between the pores in the deep crust might explain the relatively low resistivity of the deep crust.
We also don't know how much water escaped Earth's atmosphere during the flood.
You better hope not much, because water going from below the surface to escape velocity is going to cause a heat problem like you wouldn't believe. We're talking multiple hydrogen bombs per square kilometer of the Earth levels of heat.
The ball of fire is 3 miles across as it shatters both land and sea. The shock wave races 35 miles and reaches the control ship with force enough to jar the solidly mounted camera. In seconds, the fireball erupts into a geyser that towers 25 miles into the stratosphere, spreading into a 100-mile wide mushroom cloud. Rising with the cloud are millions of cubic feet of radioactive ash, a virulent byproduct of the fusion bomb that will shower down over the area in approximately 1 hour.
Noah's going to need a spaceship and a warp drive to survive this. A wooden boat isn't going to cut it.
Both of these unknown variables would add to the volume estimate based on the above concentrations of deuterium in salt.
Yeah, but the more you explain as lost volume, the worse the heat problem gets. And you, like all creationists, have yet to even propose a mechanism that could shed all this heat, beyond miracle.
So for now, we'll just say the deep, or the Great Deep as referred to in Genesis 7:11, was a global interconnected subcrustal ocean chamber that was at least 0.9 miles deep at the time of the flood.
Cool, so we're ignoring what the Bible actually says so that we can be biblical literalists. That makes sense. Honestly, before this video, I didn't realize how unbiblical this is. Never mind how physically absurd it is. I'm impressed that Walt Brown has managed to basically just crap all over not just physics, but Genesis too. No wonder virtually everyone says this so-called theory is bunk.
Based on observations of current size and thickness of continents, hydroplate theory proposes that the original granite plate was 60 miles thick. If you've read prior editions of the theory, you'll notice that this has increased from initial estimates of 10 miles thickness.
Putting the subterranean ocean under much more pressure, making it much less stable. Neato! See, the thing with this and other creationist models is that every time they solve one problem, like adding enough volume to the crust in the subterranean ocean to account for the interplanetary debris Walt says were caused by a flood, it creates another problem. The reason for this, fundamentally, is that young Earth creationism is wrong, and so there is no way for it to be both internally coherent and for it to also match observations in the real world. That's why young Earth creationists always have incoherent models. You see it here, you see it with the thickness of the crust, you see it in creationists simultaneously holding to the waiting time problem and also created heterozygosity. It's the same as when flat earthers use mutually exclusive explanations to explain things like time zones, the self-celestial pole, and sunrise and sunset. Turns out, when you've decided from the outset that a particular conclusion must be true, even though it isn't, it's hard to then develop a coherent and internally consistent idea of how the world operates and the history thereof.
This change was arrived at after carefully considering the implications of several rather recent discoveries. Most recently in New Zealand, researchers have used explosives to generate specific short wavelength seismic waves to produce the clearest picture of what they believe to be a subducting plate.
Are you saying it's not a subducting plate?
They are puzzled, however, because almost 50 miles down, a 6-mile thick channel containing melted rock and/or water has also been identified. This is not at all what popular plate tectonic theory predicts.
Still waiting on that citation for it's somehow inexplicable by plate tectonics. Why do I feel like we're not going to get a citation?
For hydroplate theory, these discoveries are exciting because they are consistent with how a collapsed water-permeated subterranean chamber would be expected to reflect these seismic waves.
I notice that you also have no citation for that. Interesting.
The much slower wave velocities measured in the channel indicate magma and/or water trapped within the chamber's roof and floor.
Well, given that crust material usually has a significantly lower melting point than the rocks of the mantle, and therefore it tends to melt into magma pools, which can cause volcanoes, which is how the whole ring of fire around the Pacific formed and is forming, this doesn't actually sound all that out of line with plate tectonics. In fact, it sounds outright predicted.
We will soon cover in detail how hydroplate theory explains these findings using cause-to-effect reasoning.
You say that, but the video only has like 5 more minutes, so I'm not sure how much explanation we're going to get. And based on how this intro did, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of point of me delving into the other half dozen or so episodes you have, Brian.
This is the first strong evidence that the granite crust was in fact much thicker than previous estimates.
Is it strong evidence? Are you sure it's not, no evidence at all? That's what it sounds like.
Corroborating this is the growing body of evidence that trans-Neptunian objects, or TNOs, are most likely from Earth as well.
Excuse me, the f*** did you just say?
Now that sure needs a citation. Seriously, what evidence would that be? Do you even know how much energy it would take to lift 1 kilogram from Earth to the orbit of Neptune? Just to get a kilogram to low Earth orbit takes 32.9 megajoules. That's enough energy to bring a kilogram of ice to boil and then boil it away 12 more times. You want to get this past Neptune, which is 29 times the distance from the Earth to the Sun. That energy has to exist on Earth to get that water to past Neptune. That means it presumably exists in the potential energy of the crust which collapses. That means that energy ends up in large part simply heating the Earth. Can you see now why all estimates have hydroplate boiling off Earth's oceans and then proceeding to at best melt the Earth's crust, if not turn it into a plasma?
Remember, no cracks can exist in granite below 5 miles.
No.
So the perfect seal conditions we just reviewed existed to keep the surface waters from seeping down and, more importantly, the subsurface waters of the deep from pushing up through the granite.
If only the buoyant force didn't exist pushing water up, which then relieves the compressive force on the bottom of the rocks, allowing fractures to propagate upward. Darn.
These are the basic starting assumptions of the hydroplate theory.
Anytime the starting assumptions are absolutely bonkers insane, you know you're in for a good time.
From here, the theory uses only laws of physics to explain cause to effect, which we'll see provides reasonable and straightforward explanation of Earth's surface features today.
Funny, because Earth's surface isn't just a solid sphere of glass, as if the Covenant from Halo got there. because that's what it should be if you were right. That is, assuming it had time to cool down from being a big ball of plasma.
This is a phase diagram for water. At atmospheric conditions, we see water freeze at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 14.7 pounds per square inch pressure. As heat is added, ice melts and the temperature rises until at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, boiling produces vapor.
Pro tip, if you want to be taken seriously in science, use metric units. Degrees Celsius for temperature and pascals for pressure are what you want. Also, label your damn axes.
The weight of 60 miles of granite above means that the Great Deep was pressurized to approximately 372,000 pounds per square inch.
So we're in the supercritical fluid region. That's not a good thing. That stuff is even more corrosive than just liquid water or steam. It's better at dissolving things than normal water, and its high energy and relatively high viscosity make it great at mechanical erosion too. This is even less sustainable than I thought it was at the beginning. Why does even Walt Brown take this seriously?
As will be seen, work was being done on the water of the Great Deep, which gradually increased its internal energy, so we will refer back to this diagram several times and see how conditions in the water changed and the dramatic effects that were produced.
Dramatic is putting it mildly, Brian.
Just as the moon's gravity works to produce the ocean tides, the original granite shell would also have been worked and distorted by the moon's gravity,
Further propagating cracks from both above and below, and remember, since the gravitational force is essentially constant, forces like tidal forces actually become the dominant force in terms of change to the system.
However, because it was a solid shell of great mass, the tidal effect on the crust was not as dramatic as with the open sea.
Maybe not in terms of measurable rise and fall, but that doesn't really help the model at all.
Still, the crust would have deformed into a slight egg shape toward the moon. Obviously, the graphic has been exaggerated so we can see the distortions, and I've simplified the pillars to only 4 dark brown shapes, where the granite was pressed into the solid mantle.
Oh hey, they actually look like pillars this time. Interesting.
In reality, the global surface area of the relatively thin 60-mile crust would have allowed it to form pillars at thousands of locations.
Still no citation, so maybe, but I can just as easily say, no it can't.
Twice a day the shell would have deformed, so the trapped waters of the deep were continually being pumped through the subterranean chamber at high pressure.
That's going to erode those pillars right fast, as well as erode right up through the crust. Because remember, we're in the supercritical zone of the phase diagram. Not the most stable place to be.
This work added energy in the form of heat to the waters under the crust.
Oh good, even more heat. It's almost like the catastrophic collapse of this whole system is inevitable. And as if that is a bit weird for a perfect Earth, and you can't just say maybe this was only set up after the fall, because the verses badly misused by Brian and Walt Brown alike to justify this idea in the first place are all from the prelapsarian creation week period, so that's a no-go.
At the same time, each pillar experienced tension, compression, and shear loads twice a day. Friction from these cyclic loads slowly heated the pillars as well. To get an idea of how these forces produced heat, bend a steel wire or a paperclip back and forth several times, then touch it at the bend. Now imagine how much heat would be generated at the extreme pressures in rock 60 miles deep. As tidal pumping continued, the pressure and temperature in the subterranean chamber increased. Eventually, liquid water changed phase into a state known as supercritical water.
Not sure that's a feature rather than a bug.
The hydroplate theory is not the first to recognize the possibility of a supercontinent.
I like the little question mark as if the existence of Pangaea were at all in question.
We all learned about Edward Bullard's Pangaea concept in high school. Few of us were encouraged to look at it critically, however.
Yeah, it's high school. College students sure do look at it critically, however, and it's very well evidenced by things like paleobiogeography, as well as strata that can be easily correlated horizontally across the continents in a way that really only makes sense if they were physically joined in the past.
For example, what happened to half of Mexico and Central America?
The land bridge between North and South America is extremely recent information. It didn't exist yet. But also, this map is crappy. Here's a better one, and you'll notice that most of Mexico is right there.
And what forces rotated North America clockwise, while South America was rotated counterclockwise?
Tectonic forces, that is, the movement of the mantle. You know, it's kind of in the name, plate tectonics. I'm sorry that the idea that the mantle doesn't always move in straight lines is somehow a concept beyond you, but that doesn't make it not real.
We also probably did not catch the fact that Africa's area is actually 35% larger than we were shown in the books.
That's because it's literally not. That's just a flat-out lie. It's a conclusion you can only come to if you're using a flat map like a Mercator map. Use a globe and suddenly you'll see that it's just not real.
That's right, Africa had to be scaled down by about 35% to make it fit the picture.
No, that's wrong. You're either lying or repeating a lie you were told uncritically.
In fact, Africa and Europe fit poorly with the Americas when positioned in 3D on a globe.
Sorry your little papier-mâché globe doesn't work well, but that's a you problem, not a plate tectonics problem.
Especially when you include the continental shelves that extend under the oceans and do not allow removal of materials as needed in order to force a fit.
Oh, you mean those younger parts of the continental plate? Who cares?
There's another feature on the globe that fits these coastlines much better.
The Mid-Atlantic Ridge? Really? The thing that's really only explained by the breakup of Pangaea? Okay.
One of the key observations Walt Brown has made is that with an actual 3D globe, the coastlines of all four continents fit very well with the mid-oceanic ridge.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. What the hell is going on here?
Discovered in the 1950s, the ridge, which wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball, is the longest mountain chain at 46,000 miles length.
And it was a key part of confirming both plate tectonics and the existence of Pangaea.
The fact that this is almost entirely covered by water is not the only trait that sets it apart from today's continental surface mountains.
It's also entirely volcanic and the center point for the seafloor spreading, which is increasing the size of the Atlantic Ocean, pushing new and old worlds farther from each other, and which, if you play it backwards, results in Pangaea at a point in the past.
As we'll soon see, the mid-oceanic ridge is a scar in Earth's mantle left over from the flood, which roughly traces the path of the crack that opened up in the granite shell.
Oh, okay, why is it spreading out then? What caused that?
Surface mountains appear to be the result of compressed materials that have been piled up. This makes sense. Push compressed material together and it piles up.
Meet Mount Omuro, a cinder cone volcano in Japan. What was compressed to make that? Oh, right, it's nothing. It's essentially a blister being pushed up by subterranean magma. It's almost like mountain formation is more complex than this nonsense explanation would lead you to believe.
But the mountains of the mid-oceanic ridge are uniquely different than surface mountains. Tensile fractures show that the material has been pulled apart in two perpendicular directions.
Am I taking crazy pills here? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
That's exactly what plate tectonics expects based on the idea of Pangaea. This is like looking at a suspect's fingerprint on a murder weapon and then concluding that that proves they couldn't be the killer.
This is counterintuitive. How do you build a mountain chain by pulling material apart, in two directions no less?
With volcanoes!
Hydroplate theory explains the unique conditions that produced this strange global geologic feature.
Right, by being physically impossible, causing the melting of the entire crust of the Earth and killing all life. But hey, I guess it could maybe leave you with a ridge somewhere, so that's good.
We will discuss how this happened later, but first let's continue to investigate the nature of supercritical fluids, since it is key to understanding and grasping the magnitude and direction of energy released during the flood.
Sounds cool, except that it's literally the end of the video. Wow, this was far worse than I was expecting, and honestly, just writing the script was quite the chore. Brian, I don't know if I want to even continue with your 7-part series, but perhaps my audience can tell me. If you think you want more hydroplate theory from Brian, let me know, because there's hours more. If you think this is dumb enough already and you don't need more, then let me know that too. Either way, leave it in the comments, and of course make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you've subscribed, turn on notifications with the bell icon so you're always notified when I have new content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Thanks for watching, but before you go, I just want to say a special thank you to my channel members and my patrons, especially those pledging $20 or above. Bob Knob, Work in Progress, Bent Hovend, Tapioca Weasel, Denny5252, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, San, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Veed, Eleron Teller, and Pat L. Dennis. As you probably know, YouTube is a very volatile platform, and from month to month my income on the channel can swing wildly. But the people you see on screen are directly supporting so that I don't have to worry too much about that, and the channel can keep going as it is, and perhaps even improving. If you'd like to join this team, there are links below to join the channel or in the description to join the Patreon. The Patreon starts as low as $1 a month, and the channel memberships start as low as $1.99 a month. On Patreon, you can even get a discount for pledging annually. If you do decide to pledge, you'll get access to an exclusive Discord server just for channel supporters, as well as early access to all of my pre-recorded videos, often up to 2 months in advance. Higher tiers will unlock even better perks. Now, if an annual or monthly pledge isn't right for you, but you still want to support the channel, There is a merch store down in the description, as well as an Amazon wish list, just for me. And if financial support isn't something you can or want to do, then if you still want to help out the channel, please just like and share these videos and make sure you comment on them. It really helps the channel out. Thanks again for watching.
How